The majority of the American people, and I think the vast majority of the American people, are really united on many issues, even
Mhm.
though this is an election that looks as if there was great division. And so then you might say, well, then what happened?
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up and commiserate about the election results this week. But we are also inspired because we invited Skye Perryman back to the program. Skye is the CEO and president of Democracy Forward, and she has inspired us to continue the work and roll up our sleeves and get going. So it is a great pod. Stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, I usually try to come up with something funny or quippy, and I got nothing for you today. There's nothing funny happening right now.
Well, there is the big joke being played out on the country right now.
Well, okay. Only, I hate to break it to you, it's not a joke.
You're absolutely right. It
I
is
have
not a joke.
Pinched myself so many times to wake up from the nightmare. But you know what? We're here.
We are here.
Are.
We are.
And so, folks, I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably feeling a little bit like we are, unless you're just like, I don't know, hate listening, in which case, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Missy welcomes you, and she'll pour a drink for you.
That's right. Anyways, so there's been something playing in my mind this week that I feel like our audience is a fairly niche audience,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And I think our audience will probably relate to this.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're in church.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
I do recall that.
Okay, and you're in churches and a pastor comes in and
Yes.
you have that pastor for a couple of years or so, and things just start to not be great.
Okay. I'm
And
with
you
you.
start to see things that maybe don't mesh with the person that you interviewed for the job.
Yeah. Every pastor evolves and changes.
So you've been on kind of the receiving end of the phone calls.
Oh, yeah.
you got.
100%.
Okay, so a deacon, someone from the pastor search committee,
Get it?
will eventually call the past church
Yes.
and their coworkers and their members and say, we're seeing some things. Did you guys ever see some things? And that church will be like, oh yeah, let me tell you what we saw.
Yes.
And they'll list off all of these things that this minister did at
Right.
their previous church.
Uh-huh.
And it's at that point where the pastor search committee has to realize they didn't do their due diligence. They didn't call the references.
Didn't check references.
They didn't check references.
Yeah.
They didn't call
Gotcha.
the past
Got-
employer
yeah.
and say, tell me what you
Tell
think.
me what happened. Gotcha.
So as I've been, this narrative has been playing over and over again in my head because
Yes.
it happens,
Yes.
right?
No, I do.
You have
No,
definitely.
there's so many voices going on in your head. So,
Oh, they're all there.
yeah. But
If only they could have all voted. Anywho. So I've been playing this narrative in my head and I tried
Yeah.
to think of, I'm going to look up a list. I'm going to look up a list of references and past coworkers that have told us, you should not hire this man. Right?
Yeah. There are plenty out there.
America, we forgot to check the references. That is what I'm going with today.
That is what you're going with.
We forgot to check the references. And in doing so, I was prepared to come with a list and I was going to run down a litany of all the people that have worked for
Right.
the president-elect who
Yeah.
have said, you know what? Don't hire
Don't
this guy.
hire this guy. Yeah.
Don't hire this guy. And guess what? The list is too dadgum long for me to even go down it.
Yeah.
I've come up with, there are
It's
several.
absolutely crazy. You're absolutely right.
Yes, we forgot to check the references. And you know what? We're going to pay for it. We're going to reap the consequences of that. So that is all I have to say about this week.
Well,
Actually, it's not all I have to say.
That's absolutely an excellent point because we've been trying to make that argument for some time now of, because we always get accused of making these accusations against former President Trump, now President-elect Trump. And we do. I mean, I come by it honest and I plead guilty on that account. But what we've been doing recently is saying, listen to those people who worked with him, the John Kellys of the world, the General Mattises of the world, the General Millies of the world, and then also listen to his family. I mean, everybody who has worked with this guy, who have been close to him, including family members, some pretty close, maybe siblings, for example, have said, do not hire this guy.
Right.
And what did America do?
We hired him.
We
didn't make the call. We forgot to make the call.
Exactly.
We're like, yeah, he'll do whatever,
yeah.
you know? So anyways, that's just what I have been camped out on the last few days. So you're welcome.
You're welcome. Well, thank you.
The other little bit of news I brought to you today that's disappointing as we talk.
Oh, geez, more disappointing news.
Well, I mean, you know that like I am the happiest when I'm in, despair.
Oh, well, boy, ramp up for the next 4 years, baby.
Oddly enough. So I'm just in our state alone, as we unpack, and I'll be honest, and I think our audience knows, like, I fully expected Donald Trump to be elected.
You said that.
I've said it
time and time again.
What I did not expect is the popular vote to go the way it did, or the way it appears to have gone as of the recording of this podcast.
Sure.
Which, I mean, to me, great. We've shown who we are. We've got a mirror up, and now we need to deal with that. We need to look in the mirror. We need to get the magnifying, see all the pores, see all the, imperfections. But an article came out recently, the last few days, talking about our own home state. And I've got a friend who constantly says, we are not a red state. We are a non-voting state.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So Oklahoma had the lowest voter turnout in the nation.
Good job, Sooner State.
Right. We had, let me look real quick. We had 53%.
Golly, that's terrible.
So, folks, I mean, we get the country we deserve.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
that just shows it. But also it begs the question, and I know this is maybe a conversation maybe that will go on longer than we have, but are we making it easy enough for folks to vote?
Yeah.
And are we making it easy enough? I know in our area, it's easy to vote. But I also know that in other areas, it's not, and that's by intention.
Yeah, I heard a couple of pundits, even on Election Day, and leading up to Election Day and early voting, where people were standing in line for 2 to 3 hours in polling places, and it just really boggles the mind that in this day and age, in 2024, that there are still lines 3 hours long to vote, and I mean. Call Chick-fil-A. They got that figured out of how to move lanes.
Right. I mean, call them. They'll give you some free Jesus chicken.
That's
it's all
right.
good.
They'll get Jesus chicken. So at any rate, you're absolutely right. That's why we continue to stress the importance of engagement, the importance of voter registration, because when people show up at the polls, then we get a truer sense of who we are as a country. What we have discovered over the last week is that there's a microcosm of the country that believes in Trumpism and his policies. And some of them said they look the other way about all of his immorality and vulgarness to vote for his policies. Well, I got news for you. Those policies are immoral and vulgar as well. And so there's a segment of our society, which I think is a microcosm, that told us this is what they want and this is what we get. And when you don't participate in the process, it's difficult to.
And it would be not easier. I just feel like if we had a better representation of everyone in our country, it would be not an easier pill to swallow, but at least everybody would have had a voice. And you would have said, okay, out of all of our country, 51% of you are choosing this. All right, gotta go.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, we could commiserate for time to immortal, because I know that really gives you a lot of
joy
to do that. But we've got to move on. And so we got to sit down with Skye Perryman this week after the election to talk about the results, talk about how to move forward. And it's always a delight to speak with Skye, even in the most dire situations that we find ourselves. But before we go to the interview, I do want to say this. I've had this really visceral reaction to the election. And it reminded me, took me back 8 years ago and what happened at 2016. I was more surprised back then than I am today. What my level of surprise, I guess, is the margin of victory in which former president, now President-elect Trump, won by on Tuesday. And so there is a lot of pain. There is a lot of heartache in the country right now for those of us who do not support Trumpism and his policies and his political ideology, as well as Christian nationalism that basically put him in office. There's a lot of people who are worried and scared right now, and rightly so. I will not try to convince you otherwise that there's nothing to be scared about. I am really scared about the future of this country. I'm really terrified about the next 4 years and where we're going. So here's what I want to tell our listeners. If you're in a dark place right now, know that that's okay. That's okay to wallow in what has taken place and that you woke up in a country you did not think really existed, but it does. But there is going to come a time where we're going to need everybody hands on deck to begin resisting what's about to take place. And so I just want to extend an invitation to all of our listeners, all of our partners to say, hey, Good Faith Media, me personally, I'm ready to get to work because I still believe in a more perfect union. I still believe we can achieve great things as a country, but it's never going to be easy. JFK said one time, we go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. I believe in this country, but it's going to take hard work, and I'm ready to get to work. And I just wanted to say that I recognize and empathize with so many people because I'm in that dark place too. But there's going to come a time where we have to open our eyes and get to work, and that time is going to be soon.
And Skye helps to start our to-do list.
Absolutely. So stay tuned. Missy and I'll be right back with Skye Perryman with Democracy Forward. Hey friends, it's Mitch Randall, CEO of Good Faith Media. We've been hard at work producing a new podcast for our friends over at Free Mom Hugs.
Well, Mitch, disclaimer.
Yeah?
You and Cliff have been hard at work. I'm mostly just here for color commentary. Let's just be honest about that.
Very, very true.
But for those who may not know, the nonprofit Free Mom Hugs, founded by Sarah Cunningham, empowers the world to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community through visibility, education, and conversation.
And perhaps you've heard about their work. They do indeed offer free hugs and high fives. They stand in at weddings, all of it helping people who have experienced rejection for being who they are.
Their new podcast is titled Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive. A new episode will drop each Wednesday during the month of June, which is Pride Month.
But Pride 365 is about more than a month. It's about a movement and the moms keeping queer kids alive.
The first episode drops June 5th, and it's hosted by Free Mom Hugs' very own saints, Sarah Cunningham and Katrina Cobb.
Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive, a new podcast produced by Good Faith Media for Free Mom Hugs.
Learn more at freemomhugs.org and goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a returning guest. Skye Perryman is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward. We had Skye on a few weeks ago to talk about the dangers of Project 2025, as well as the fallout from the Chevron deference case. Well, Skye, I want to say welcome back. It's always great to see you, but oh my gosh. We've got so much to talk about.
What a week, guys. What a week.
So let's just start with the obvious. What the hell just happened?
You know, it's election day. We're several days past election day, and I think we've seen what the American people have voted for. And you know what I really take away, and I'm interested in how you guys see it sitting from where you are in Oklahoma. But what we actually saw, let's take a step back away from the presidential for a moment. What we actually saw was that the majority of people in states where they were given a choice, in geographically diverse states where they were given a choice, including in deep red states like Missouri and even in Florida, we saw the majority of people that voted to preserve and protect abortion access. The Florida ballot initiative didn't pass because it requires a 60% threshold, but it got over a 50% voting rate. And we also saw people go to the polls and protect public education against voucher programs and fair wages. And so I do want us to focus on what has been a theme that you all have sought to emphasize on this program and that we've talked about, that the majority of the American people, and I think the vast majority of the American people, are really united on many issues, even though this is an election that looks as if there was great division. And so then you might say, well, then what happened?
Right.
And I don't have an explanation for that. I'm going to tell you, I think we need to listen and we need to understand what happened, and we need to understand, you know, what happens when states are voting to protect things like abortion access and then voting for a presidential candidate who is responsible for the bans and the devastation that we're seeing across the country. So I don't have a great explanation for that now, but I do want to make sure that the deep plot here doesn't get completely lost,
Right.
which is that on the issues, we did see what we have long known about many of these issues. And that, I think, there's seeds of our work ahead of us. And I think that there's, you know, the deep work that needs to be done.
Well, that is well said. And, you know, just to kind of follow up on your comments, you know, obviously what the election did reveal were these nuances that, you know, came to conclusion regarding the issues that you just, you know, talked about and pointed out. But then you got this larger issue of, you know, people voting for abortion rights, but then on that same ballot, electing a president or casting their vote for a candidate for president
who's responsible for taking them away.
And it's just really bizarre. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of deep analysis. There's been a lot of comments since the election, a lot of finger pointing. But, you know, as two people who live in a deep red state, one of the things that comes to mind as you were speaking was this really averse attitude towards the institution, and anything that resembles institutional policy or institutional hierarchy, it is automatic. There's this visceral reaction to it or opposition to it by anybody. We see that here in Oklahoma. We saw that even within the Republican Party itself, of anybody who seemed to be, you know, what we would call rational in evaluating circumstances. It was rejected, even within their own party. And that's what we've said here in Oklahoma a lot. There's some wonderful conservative politicians here in this state, you know, who I would disagree with policy-wise, but they're rational. But they can't get out of primaries because they're seen as part of this institutional process. And so the candidate who's seen as anti-institutional always rises to the top. And I just kind of wonder, is that part of what's going on nationally?
I think in large part it is. I also think that it is important that people feel that the government is delivering for them and that these institutions deliver for them. And I don't know that there has been that feeling among so many people in our country. And that is a real piece of this work. And it's why I was really grateful that when you had me on before, you wanted to focus on the Chevron deference decision, which will make it harder for our institutions to deliver for people. Far right appointments to the Supreme Court make it harder for our courts to deliver the protection of rights for people. And so our work has to be to not just defend institutions because they're institutions. That's academic, it's esoteric. That's not what we're about.
Right.
It's about defending people and communities and ensuring that our institutions are working for them. And we're going to have our work cut out for us because the United States just elected a president who is uninterested in the government working for people, for all people, and who wants to weaponize and use our institutions actually against the people. Now, why did people vote for that? Well, I don't know. But as a candidate, certainly President Trump and J.D. Vance made a number of statements seeking to disavow these extreme proposals in things like Project 2025. I didn't believe that for a second because I've been on the front lines, as have you, of dealing with the devastation of much of what the prior Trump administration did, which was right out of that playbook, and much of what these groups that support them are doing. But now it is going to be time for the American people and these communities to hold them to account and to ensure that we are very clear that while he may have won by, in some instances, very large margins as a candidate, we saw no evidence in this election that any of these issues are issues that the American people champion. We saw the American people champion abortion access in states when the issue was on the ballot. We saw them championing fair wages and public education. And we see that time and again when things are on the ballot.
Yeah.
And so what's going to be important is that we hold our lawmakers, including the president, to account publicly and in the courts when he veers from what he asserted, which of course we didn't believe and don't believe, was seeking to sort of disavow some of this extreme behavior.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be part of the work,
Yeah.
which is what we're focused on here at Democracy Forward. I also, though, think, and you guys feature this on your show, and you're in the middle of communities that are so affected, we continue to have just deep problems in this nation with people seeking to otherize and target people. The Madison Square Garden speech as a mom that's raising a 9-year-old son. I mean, what do you do with that? And how do you explain to your child that this is someone that the American people, by some large margin in some areas, elected?
Yeah.
And that is the work that we have to do in our personal lives, in our community lives, and in our national life to heal whatever it is that has continued to plague this nation, that seeks to prioritize some overall and that seeks to target people because they are different. And that's a lot of the work we'll be doing at Democracy Forward, is ensuring that when that happens, we are holding our leaders to account, taking them to court, pushing back, and enabling the American people to be part of their better selves, which is not something that we have seen from former President Trump.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of analysis
Current
take place. Yeah. There's President-elect. There's
President-elect Trump.
certainly going to be a lot of analysis for a long time about this particular election. How can America reelect someone who is so divisive in their politics and so draconian in their policies? But here we are, Skye. And so we've got to figure out how to counter this. I wrote an article the day after the election this week, basically suggesting the resistance begins today. And it's a resistance against authoritarianism, fascism, all the things that seem to be anti-democratic and anti-American from my perspective. So our question for you today: we admire so much the work of Democracy Forward. What is Democracy Forward doing to mobilize and prepare for 2025 and beyond?
Unfortunately, because of our past here at Democracy Forward, we got our start representing people in communities who needed to push back against harmful and unlawful policies of the first Trump administration. We have been working for some time, for over a year, to prepare for a moment that I think we hoped would not come. And so the work is going to be really important, both in the public square and in our communities and in public American life, and also in the courthouse, where it is going to be important that we push our institutions to do what they are meant to do in a democracy, which is to protect the American people and to protect their rights. So we have been working with a range of organizations, from small organizations and communities to large national organizations, to ensure that there is going to be good legal representation for people who will be harmed almost immediately, we anticipate, as a result of unlawful and harmful activity that the administration will issue. I will tell you that the Trump administration lost in court a lot last time. There are extreme organizations that are behind Project 2025. Guess what? They lose in court a lot now. And we are really going to be focusing on making sure that there's legal resources for people and communities that need them, to ensure that the president is abiding by the Constitution and the laws of this country. But legal work is not the only work. And in fact, it's going to be more important this time that people use their voices and their lives to understand that we all have a role. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Barbara Jordan used to say, government is not a spectator sport. The stakes are too high. And so in this moment, what we have to do is to make sure people are not losing their hope or their agency. Even if you're enraged, turn that into something. And that's going to be doing a lot of the work that you guys do at Good Faith Media. It's having conversations, it's using your voice, using the platforms that you have, and really seeking to not give up on this idea that we can achieve democracy in this country, and we will achieve it, but it is going to take work. It's not vibes, it's work.
Right.
And that's what we've got to focus on in the days ahead.
So you just kind of touched on my follow-up question, which is, as someone who's not in the legal field like you are, assembling brilliant attorneys to help fight against, policies in court, what are some things that you would suggest would be on our to-do list in order to stay engaged, in order to help fight this fight, in order to help support on the ground in ways that we can't maybe in the courts?
Look, one is to stay engaged and stay informed, and you guys do that with Good Faith Media, but the people that are at home need to be doing that too. It is an act of advancing our democracy, and right now it is an act of ultimate righteous resistance to do things like avail yourself of mainstream accurate information, data and information about what's happening, and to speak that truth into a void of misinformation and frankly lies. And so being informed is important. Understanding that it can happen here. We talked on the last time that I joined your show about how in 2021, after the January 6th insurrection, that American democracy ended up on a list of backsliding democracies. The United States ended up on a list of backsliding democracies and has remained on that ever since because of this corrosive misinformation, disinformation, denialism. It is important in this moment that we understand where we are and what could happen, and not engage in sort of a, well, it's not as bad as we think it is. No, it is going to get bad. You heard what was said at Madison Square Garden, and you just saw a nation respond to that in some ways. And so I think being able to look that extremism in the face, and I always say, and don't blink, but confront it and have courage, is going to be incredibly important. There are lots of organizations that people should be following. You don't need to be a lawyer or a politician or a pastor or a doctor to be able to support the work that needs to be done in this moment, and helping people access healthcare, and helping people access their legal rights, and helping people find community with each other. And so really, we do want you to follow organizations like Democracy Forward, like your favorite community organizations or others, because there will be opportunities to take action. The other thing is, we have a system of checks and balances in this country. It's not ideologically balanced right now. But the president is not the only leader that was just elected. There are a range of people that are going to be going to Congress that are held account. Certainly your congressional representatives are held account every 2 years in ways it's important to understand and to expect that our leaders in other branches of government are doing their part too, even if they may not be aligned with all of your values, that they're aligned with democracy. And so I think making your voices heard that way locally to people who have a direct responsibility to you and your community is going to be incredibly important.
Well, I am inspired. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work. I cannot wait to partner with Democracy Forward, with Good Faith Media. We're going to continue to fight the good fight, because I do believe in the better angels of ourselves. I think Americans at their core know what is right. We have seen that throughout history. We have overcome so much in this country from the very beginning to now. This is another hurdle that we can leap over, but we have to do it together. And I am honored to be working alongside Skye Perryman and Democracy Forward. So, Skye,
thank you for having me. And we'll keep checking in on all this. And I know your listeners will have a lot of roles to play too. But this is not the time to lose hope or to despair. It's the time to roll up our sleeves and to do the work. And it's work that you all need, and it's work that so many communities have needed for some time, because you've been living in this reality in Oklahoma. Of course, I'm from Texas, and our communities there. And so some of this is about winning this fight in all the places where it's been ongoing, and then to ensure too that our nation together can overcome, which I do think it can.
So, Skye, we knew that you were the person to talk to after the news broke on Wednesday morning. We are now left inspired, ready to go to work and to go to battle for democracy, and for those of us who are people of faith to continue advocating for a more inclusive and just gospel. But before we let you go, Skye, we always ask the final question. You know it's coming, so I'm going to turn it over to Missy and let her ask it.
So, Skye, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
I think it's important that we remember that democracy does not end when an election is called. In this country, in the United States, democracy lives through the people and communities in this nation that are dedicated to building a more perfect union. That is the work of our country, and it is work that does not stop, and it is work that continues today. And so I think we need to remember that we all have this role. We will create a more perfect union together, and that we really have to be focused on the future.
Perfect way to end this conversation. Check out Democracy Forward and all the work that they are engaged in at democracyforward.org. Skye, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. Missy and I just finished up our conversation with Skye Perryman, the CEO and president of Democracy Forward.
I don't want to say she gave me hope.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But there were some encouraging points that she made. There were some encouraging points that she made. And like I said a few weeks ago when we interviewed her leading into to Election Day, I made the comment that she's like that friend on the playground that, like, I don't want to do it. She's like, grabs your hand, like, come on, we're going.
Yeah.
And so she said a couple of things. One was that Trump has lost a lot in court.
Yep.
And the other was that, looking at the way people voted, and you can't make it make sense. The disconnect is bizarre to me. Yeah. But people voted for public education, for, rights to health care and abortion care, and yet for someone who directly has shown us that they oppose it. But at the same time, you have to, and again, this is for people way smarter than me, to analyze all these things and figure out how to now tackle the issue. But in saying that, I think it was a little bit of a salve, a little bit of an ointment to my aching heart, in knowing that and also knowing that there are organizations like hers and like others who have legal brilliance that have been working for this moment for a long time and are continuing to work tirelessly to help move our country forward with democracy and not, backward.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of conversation after the announcement Wednesday that we now have a President-elect Trump. And a lot of that conversation centers around the idea that a second Trump administration means there are no guardrails or checks and balances. But while those guardrails may have been lowered in the second go around, I want to remind people I still believe that there are guardrails. And let me give you firsthand testimony from the good old state of Oklahoma, who had 53% turnout in this election. That is a deep red state, obviously, that we've got a crazy state superintendent who is always trying to enact just unlawful policies that go against the Oklahoma Constitution.
Yeah, but he's about to be gone. He's been
he's about to go on.
He's been applying for his job in D.C., which he will now get. So, anyway, sorry.
But my point is that even in this deep red state, I mean, we had an attorney general here who told him, "You are violating the state constitution," and then when he went ahead and did it in providing public money to a Catholic charter school, the Attorney General filed suit against him. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Attorney General. He's done it again with this $3 million of an attempt to get the Bible in public education, yada, yada, yada. Again, suits have been filed. Most likely the Supreme Court will again rule in favor of the plaintiffs, in which I am one of those. So what I'm saying is that while, yes, those guardrails have been lowered in this second administration as we enter into it, there are still guardrails. There are still people out there who believe in democracy, who believe in checks and balances. And my hope is that those individuals, if this thing attempts to go off the rails, which I think it's going to, there's going to be a huge attempt to get it off the rails, that there are going to be people who are there to safeguard our institutions and our democracy to make certain it's on track to continue and move forward. That's what I have to believe in. And so that is someone who lives in a deep, deep red state that sees that there are truly sensible people in places of authority and positions of power who can keep the craziness at bay if it does emerge, and I think it's going to emerge.
So what I hear you saying is we have moved the baby from the crib to the toddler bed too soon. So I'm like, when the baby was in the crib, at least he couldn't climb out. Yeah. I'm like, now y'all, we've got a little rail.
The baby can climb out now.
Climb out. So
but you know what?
Maybe a lock on the door. I don't know.
That's exactly. Oh, great minds. That's exactly what I was thinking. Make certain there's the high def baby monitor, and if at the end of the day, let's just put a lock on the door.
That's right. Can we just do that?
Oh, but I ended the intro, Missy, by talking about kind of my attitude towards this, trying to get out of this funk that I'm in and start thinking about how to respond to where we are as a country and preparing for a second Trump administration. And the more I think about it, the more energized I get, simply by the fact I know the history of this country, which there's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of heartache. There's a lot of injustice in this country. At the same time, we have been able to make great strides. This country is not perfect. This country, at its core, is still built on white supremacy, but there are glimmers of hope throughout our history that we have been able to overcome and include more people in our democracy and see justice, true justice, reign and equality for all of our citizens. I have to continue to believe in that ideal. I have to continue to fight for that ideal. It is not going to be given to me. I look at our ancestors and think about we ended slavery, we fought Jim Crow, we got voters' right passed, we got the civil rights passed, we got suffrage passed. Time and time again, when people have come together and have seen a true injustice, they have risen up to demand justice and equality for all people. I have to believe that. If I don't, I'm going to go back into our bedroom, crawl in the covers, and never be seen again. So for me to move on, for me to roll up my sleeves and get going, I have to believe in those ideals. And I promise that I will continue to fight from today to tomorrow into the next 4 years for all of those principles because I believe in them truly.
And I know that you and Skye will both be dragging me along. So I guess
Come on, Missy.
I guess I'm in it as well.
So keep fighting, folks. As I've been saying for the last 5-6 years now, make certain to stand up, speak out, and step forward for equality, freedom, and justice for every citizen and every person of faith. Because as a person of faith, that is what my faith demands of me, and that is what I'm going to continue to do. So if you find yourself, still reeling from the results of the election, that's okay. But there's going to come a time where someone's going to grab your hand and say, let's go, as Skye has told us today. So I'm inspired. I'm re-energized. I'm not looking forward to the next 4 years. I'm going to fight every chance I get to stand up, speak out, and step forward for freedom, inclusivity, and justice for everyone to make certain we're working towards a more perfect union. So I'm inspired, Missy. I hope you are.
Yes.
That was an enthusiastic yes. But I hope you are, listeners, that you're inspired and that we can move forward and begin this together. And so we will be back next week with another guest. Until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.